Hello, I'm Dean,
Hey, this is Josh Craven.
and we are here again for another episode of how to pick an agent, or how to find an agent, I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, so we're still looking for agents, and I think we're going to start off this week by getting an update on Dean's agent search. Sounds like he's got another response from an agent that he queried.
I did. I got a response from an agent, uh, and it was unfortunately in the negative. It was a agency that I sent a query letter to on, I won't say the date, but basically I sent a query letter, and then about a month and a half later, I got a response. It looks like a fairly short form letter where they just cut and paste in the name of my book, and said, "Thank you for your theory for the query for the matriarchs. Unfortunately, I'm unable at this time to offer representation, but I wish you the best with your project." And then that was that. So that was my one response I've gotten since our last episode.
Well, again, that's pretty good that you're getting responses, which kind of leads me to a funny story, because this week I was working on my agent search for querying for the Red Phantom. And in doing that, I went back and I wanted to look back over some of my queries and responses that I'd received for Hellbender. And this was back in the summer of 2018 when I was originally querying Hellbender. And when I was going back through the emails and going back through my list, I realized that there was one agent that I think there was more than one, but there was one agent in particular that I came across that I had queried and I never heard anything back. And they had an automated submission process. And so I saw the email where it said, you can check the status. And in the past, I'd gone and I'd checked the status on this query, and there'd never been anything on it. It had just been pending, it had been submitted. And it said that the status would be updated when there was any type of news to update it with. So I went ahead and clicked on the query status update just to see how the query had been disposed of by the agent, because I'd never heard anything back. And so it's kind of interesting. I went ahead and took screenshots, and I'm going to display those. I don't think there's any harm in displaying those, but you guys can see when I submitted this query and when there was some type of an answer on it.
Okay, so we have here, I'll pull up the first one. This looks like your initial submission on the query manager. We've got the name of the agency there.
Yeah, so this shows where I submitted to query manager, shows the name of the agent and their agency, the title of my book, which was Hellbender, and then of course my name and my email address. And it's interesting because obviously they have my email address here because it's posted.
Okay, and then we'll see the results of that. And we have the query status. And I guess I'll let you discuss that a little bit, since that's interesting.
Yeah, so here you can see that I originally submitted this query on June 29th, 2018. And the activity on it shows, sorry, your query was declined on January 6th, 2021. That's 2.5 years that it took for my query to be declined. Of course, the interesting thing is my novel was actually self-published in October of 2019. So about 14 months, well over a year after my novel was actually published, that it got declined by this agent. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting, because we're always talking about how sometimes your stuff gets lost in the void and you don't ever hear anything back. And that was actually 2.5 years. And then the weird thing is, again, this was like an automatic query tracking system that updated on January 6th of this year to show that my query had been declined, but I didn't even get an email. Like, the automated system apparently couldn't even kick out an automated email saying that I'd been declined.
So what do you think happened there? Do you think that was completely automated, or do you think the agent actually looked at your submission, or do you want to speculate on what happened there?
I have to speculate that the agent actually took some type of affirmative action to decline the query because it wasn't a regular date interval. Because the original submission was June 29th. If it had been kicked out on June 29th, 2021 or something, I would have said, oh, well, after 3 years, then the query tracker automatically rejects it or something. But the date was arbitrary. It was January 6th. And so it really looks like there was some type of an affirmative process to go in and decline it at that point. I just don't know why it took 2.5 years, or why they would even bother after 2.5 years to do anything.
Yeah, I almost wonder if the agent just like had a batch of queries and just went through and maybe just did a bunch of declines or something, or
Yeah, I suppose maybe they just had this account with that query tracker and they had all these open queries that they needed to close out. I mean, she may have decided a long time ago that she wasn't actually going to accept it and just didn't bother to respond or do anything with it and just let it lie, and then needed to clear out her backlog or something.
yeah, that's true. It could have been like a pocket video situation where, maybe the agent wanted to have keep their options open, so to speak, kind of like in the dating world. And they just, didn't want to say absolutely no. So they just, like I said, kept their options open kind of thing.
Yeah, possibly so. But just thought that was a pretty interesting example of how querying these agents, I don't know, sometimes it can be a little bit of a frustrating process because you just really don't know what's going on the other end, and you're kind of waiting around to see. It's kind of an important thing for an author when we invest the time and the emotions into querying an agent, and then just to never hear anything back.
Yeah,
Can be,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it can be disheartening and discouraging at times.
What it kind of reminds me of is when you're doing contract work in whatever profession, and I've done work as a contractor before, and so have you, and you're kind of sitting around waiting for a job, and you really need the money, and you don't have any income coming in, and you're sitting there waiting for them to call you with a job, and it could be very frustrating to sit there, waiting for any kind of response, yes or no, especially when your need is great, and that can, like I said, just be very frustrating.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. And the thing with agents, what I don't understand really is why some of them can't just send you an email to decline. I don't understand the whole, if you don't hear from us, we're not interested thing. That, to me, that's just odd. But I don't know. I guess there's a couple of things. I guess I'm just not maybe that type of person, first of all, and then maybe being a little bit older too. I just feel like the least you can do is a courtesy response. But I don't know. Maybe that's antiquated thinking.
Yeah, well, like I said, so much of this just seems like the dating world to me, because it's like you get a certain number of women out there that they kind of lead you on, or it's they won't give you a yes or a no, and that can be kind of excruciating to go through that process of not getting a yes or a no, and then eventually it ends up just being a no anyway.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I don't know. I think I've been out of that pool for so long. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so I just thought that was interesting. I thought some of the viewers might get a chuckle out of that 2.5 year long rejection. And again, they didn't even send me an email. Like, there wasn't even an automated email that kicked out. If I hadn't gone back in and happened to look at that query tracker, I don't think I ever would have known what happened with that.
Yeah, that definitely sucks.
But anyway, so
Well,
that is what it is.
that gets us into something I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is, I guess, having some kind of personal relationship with these gatekeepers, whether it's an agent or if it's a editor at a magazine where you're submitting things, because the editor kind of fulfills the same role at a magazine as an agent does, I think, in terms of a gatekeeping function. And I have subscription to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and in their March of this year edition, they have an article in there about, well, the question that's presented is, and I guess, because they hear this a lot, is do you have to know someone to get a short story published? In other words, do you have to have a personal relationship with the editor of the magazine in order to get a short story published? And of course, there's going to be a lot of speculation, and a lot of, writers are certainly going to feel that way, and editors are going to, take that as kind of an attack on their integrity. So they're going to claim that that's not true. And so the author of this article tries to have a somewhat systematic or scientific approach on it, and he tabulates data. And so I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at the data on that.
Yeah. So, yeah, what did that show?
Okay, so I'll share my screen here. I'm not gonna share the whole article, obviously, but just this one little section. Okay, so he came up and he tabulated data, and you can see I've circled it here. The answer in terms of, and he basically, the question he asked was, how many authors published in 2019 in one of the top 3 science fiction magazines could call it their first pro sale, or at least a significant career landmark sale? In other words, this was an unknown person getting published in either Analog Science Fiction Magazine, Asimov Science Fiction Magazine, or the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Those are the big 3 science fiction magazines. And the answer was about 19 people out of 253 in 2019 could be considered to be their sort of landmark type sale. And he broke it down here in terms of novellas, novelettes, and short stories. And and then the problem is, he goes on basically in this article to say that if you really break that down even more, those 19 probably weren't complete unknown people. And so it was probably an even lower number than 19 out of 253 that got stuff published that were unknown people. So I don't know, I guess 19 divided by 253 is
Like 8%.
7%, 7 or 8%, about 7.5%. And he said reality, it's probably half that number. So it's probably more like 3.5% that were completely unknown people that got published in one of these big 3 science fiction magazines.
So that brings up an interesting question of discussion, which is, why is that? Because most markets, most editors, when you submit, will tell you that they don't base their acceptances on who you are or what you've done in the past. They base it on the merits of the story that you're submitting at that time. So are we to believe that all the good authors have already been published, and that there's just not that many new good authors that are able to crack into these markets? Or is there really, more going on here as far as like name and resume?
Well, and the author of this article, I think he may be either an editor or an assistant editor at this magazine, and you can take his reason, I take it with a grain of salt. I think he basically goes on to say, well, really, they're just getting published because they know what the editor wants, or they know what the market wants. And so that these people, it's not really that they know the editor, it's just they know better what the market wants to read. And he basically says you should go and read these authors that got published that were new and see what it is they did, and then try to do what they did to get published.
Did you do any of that?
Well, I mean, I read these magazines because I enjoy reading them. I don't think any of these 19 were in this particular magazine, this particular subscription, this monthly subscription. So I might do that, but I have a feeling if I go back based on, you know, I hadn't read any of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction in a few years. I've had subscriptions on and off, and I've been reading the stories in here, and they're good stories, but they're all basically, they want things written from the perspective of someone from a non-Western culture or from a minority viewpoint or something along those lines. And even though, like I said, the stories in here, they actually are good stories regardless of that, but they're definitely written from a multiculturalist perspective, and that's kind of what they're looking for. And I just don't know that I want to write that way.
Yeah. So one of the things that's pretty interesting about these numbers and why this is very pertinent to my and Dean's search for an agent is because a professional sale is a pretty big deal for an author. It's, I mean, it's definitely something you're going to put on your resume. It's definitely something you're going to include in your query letter or your email to an agent. And it's just like any other job that you're applying for. You know, what you have on your resume does make a difference. And if you can say that you've got a professional sale to one of these major science fiction markets, then that's going to help you. I mean, that's going to bolster you. That's going to legitimize your writing to a great deal. And so that's why it's important for new authors to be able to break into these markets and to get published and to have professional sales. And there's a big delineation within the publishing industry, and especially within, you know, aspiring authors trying to get more things published. Have you had a professional sale or not? And for example, I write mostly dark fiction, and in horror, the American Horror Society, it's really about the only, I guess, what you call like a legitimate organization that recognizes horror writing, and they give away awards annually. They're called Stokers, and I guess this would be somewhat comparable to like a Nebula Award in science fiction. But the American Horror Writers Association, in order to get like into full voting membership and to really be recognized as a member of this, you have to have a professional sale of a story. And so when it's hard to land a professional sale if you're a new author. And if you can't get that professional sale, then you can't get recognized within your genre as being a legitimate author. And then within the horror genre, this is even compounded more because there aren't really any legacy markets like Asimov's or Analog or fantasy and science fiction. You know, you've got those big three markets in science fiction that people can crack into, and everyone knows who they are. I mean, even outside of the genre, everyone's, or I shouldn't say everyone, but most people are fairly familiar with those three markets, even outside the genre. And you don't have that in horror. I can't think of a single legacy market, prestigious market that everyone's trying to break into or get published in for horror. And so so basically what you have in horror are a lot of anthologies, a lot of small markets that are come and go. Most of them don't stick around very long. Most of them are not profitable. And if they're not profitable, they can't afford to pay professional rates. And so you can kind of see where this is going. Like this kind of stacks up. You can't find a market to make a professional sale to. And therefore you can't get recognized within the American Horror Writers Association, you know, as a legitimate author. And then that makes it harder for you to market yourself to an agent as, you know, well, if the agent wants to know, have you had any professional sales? The answer is going to be no, but the answer is going to be no because there's not really any professional markets out there that are paying professional rates that are publishing these stories. And so it kind of compounds on itself, and it makes it really, really hard to crack into being a professional author in the horror writers genre.
Do they consider any publication in any type of magazine or whatever to be a professional writing credit, like for purposes of getting being able to vote for the American Horror Writers Association?
Not any, but it has to kind of be, they say within the genre, but fantasy and horror blur, and fantasy and science fiction blur.
Mm-hmm.
And so where you have the overlap is with the fantasy. And so if you have a story that might be dark speculative fiction that has enough of an overlap that you could possibly get it published in one of those big three markets for science fiction, that would probably count. But if I sold, a story, a slice of life story to Reader's Digest, that likely would not count for the American Horror Writers Association. Asimov's would, but something else wouldn't. So kind of yes, kind of no. And I have tried to submit some of my stories if I thought that they had enough like overlapping speculative elements. I have submitted them to some science fiction markets. But so you're talking about new authors being able to crack in to those professional markets. It's, I believe that guy said around 4% actual. If you're not writing science fiction and you're writing dark speculative fiction, you're even smaller. Like, I don't know how many of those people are actually going to be able to be new authors that are going to break into those big three science fiction markets when they're not writing hard science fiction.
Well, that is definitely disheartening to see. Like I said, it seemed like he just kind of dismissed at the end, or he basically said, "Oh, go and read those 19 people and see what they did, and do what they did in order to, get your stuff published in these magazines." So,
yeah, that's kind of an interesting point that you make there too. They'll say, read these other authors and learn what you need to do, and then they'll tell you, well, you need to be original. Don't copy everyone else. We're looking for something new.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I don't think there's really an answer on some of this. It's like, if your writing's good, your story's compelling, and they like it, they're going to publish it.
Yeah. And like I said in here, I'm pretty sure all of these people that I've read these stories by are of European extraction, but they're all writing stories about minorities or people from different cultures. And so I'm sure they've just realized that's the secret sauce right now to getting published, is that they're gonna have to write about a non-Western culture or something like that, to have an appeal, or to be able to get past the gatekeepers.
I guess that's seen as either a subplot element or, some underlying component that makes it a little bit different.
Yeah, and I don't know if the market wants that or what. It could be, especially in fantasy and science fiction, that I have a feeling it probably fantasy and science fiction skews more female readership. And so it could just be that that's what they want in that magazine. Analog tends to have a much more of or at least when I would read it, it had a lot more authors that were of a much more right-wing viewpoint. You'd get some definite Heinlein-esque type stories in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. So it's not impossible, but just I don't know, a little bit of maybe some negative stuff this week, but just maybe a little bit of a reality check too as to what exactly is going on in the publishing industry and how it's kind of hard to build up a resume, and of course that resume helps you land an agent. Anyway, not to be too much of a downer this week, but I think that pretty much covers what we've had going on this week and kind of what we've been looking at while we're waiting for more news to break.
Sounds about right. All
right.
My goals for next week will be to try and get a few more agent submissions out, but I'm also trying to outline for a novel, so that's taking some time as well.
Yeah, ongoing process for sure. Same here. I'm going to be still working on my agent list, and with any luck, get some queries out pretty soon on the Red Phantom. So have a good week.
Take care.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.